No, there's not going to be a quiz. Everybody says that. Everybody says there's going to be a quiz at the end, and it's like lame. That's so old. No, but what I want you to do is, while I'm talking, because we're recording tonight, so that all the poor people who I can't go to can see it online. So I went ahead and said I'd record this one for them, and for that purpose, do me a favor and write questions down. I'm not going to run out the door as soon as I'm done. So have your questions ready for me. I love answering questions, which apparently PED doesn't like doing. I went to it too in Las Cruces, I know. I said it's amazing that this many people in Clovis showed up. I thought Hobbs was going to be the hotbed because they had so many opt-outs, but I think I know why. It's because PED was here first. So you're wanting to kind of show up and maybe get some truth out of this. PED didn't show up in Hobbs until I was gone. So if you're not familiar with that PED thing, I'm going to throw out acronyms once in a while. I'll clarify it if I forget to. Then you can raise your hand and say, what? Okay. PED is the Public Education Department. That's Hannah Skindera's baby. For now. It's actually ours because it's Public Education Department. But she kind of thinks she can take care of it. A couple of things I'm going to talk about tonight, and I try to squeeze this all into about 45 minutes, and I try to keep it going pretty good so you don't fall asleep. I know it's like 5:30, and oh man. Hopefully you didn't eat too much. But I'm going to talk about the Common Core State Standards in a little bit of a different way from what we're used to hearing about in the mainstream media. I want to start off with what they are, specifically what they are, where they came from, who's behind this mess, and what is it doing? Not what do I think it's going to do someday, but what is it actually doing? Because that's bad enough. In fact, I think that what's happening right here under our nose is probably worse than the fear-mongering going out in the airwaves. And nobody really talks about it too much, and I think I know why. Because it's about kids. And one thing the mainstream media doesn't talk about too much is kids. They talk about the really shocking stuff like, oh my gosh, did you see their homework? But there's something else happening, and I want to make the case that there's two reasons for that. Short-term and a long-term, and I'll get into that. But let's go ahead and just jump in right away. I'm not here to sell books, but that's what you can read more about if you're like, wow, what is he talking about? There's 500 more pages on this. So, but I wanted to put this up here because if you want to follow along with the stuff that I learned and the stuff that I write about, and if you can see that, the top link is my blog address. And then follow me on Twitter too. I don't tweet a lot, but I retweet a lot. So if you're wanting a constant feed of stuff that makes your head explode, follow me on Twitter. And I'll have that at the end of my thing too, so don't try to break your pencil writing that down. The Common Core State Standards Initiative is what I want to start with. Common Core State Standards is a set of standards. The initiative is how it all got started. I could go way back when, in like 3, 4, 5 decades, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to start with No Child Left Behind, which again is not the first step in this by any means. But I want to use that as a starting point because this is where our politicians and our corporate leaders came up with the brilliant idea of how do we give No Child Left Behind more power for us. No Child Left Behind was ridiculous. It was asking for 100% proficiency rate in English and math by 3 months ago. We're not there. We can't be there, especially with the way the tests work. Let me take a minute, maybe a couple minutes, to talk about how these tests work. A standardized test doesn't measure if all students can be proficient. It measures on a curve. So that means 50% of kids get a median score or higher. The other half get a median score or lower. In other words, it is physically and mathematically impossible for all kids to get 100. Do you see how we're already being set up? So, Arnie Duncan comes down from heaven, I'm just kidding, he thinks he did, and says, I can fix this. Let me give you a waiver that says you don't have to do that by 2014. Let me give you a new way of measuring this. Let's measure growth. instead of proficiency. Instead of trying to hit that 100%, just show me that your kids are growing a certain amount. You still have to use the same tests, plus more tests, but you're not reaching 100% anymore. Thank you, Arnie. And you also have to do a couple more things. You have to either create or adopt a set of college and career ready standards. And when he said create, how many states do you really think said, ooh, get busy creating standards, guys? When he sat here and pointed at the Common Core state standards and said, but these are ready, so you can just have these. It's totally up to you, states. I know you're strapped for cash. I know you don't have time for this. You can't spend the money to get people to make your own standards, but it's totally up to you, okay? 45 of us took the bait, and 46 if you want to include DC. The only ones who didn't take it were Nebraska, one of the Dakotas, I forget which one, Texas and Virginia. Good for them, I guess. However, Texas and Virginia, to get their waivers, still had to submit college and career ready standards that Arnie Duncan signed off on. So how close do you think the Texas standards are to Common Core? Pretty close. Same with Virginia. And now you're starting to see a game where states are dropping the Common Core. Have you seen this in the news lately? Go Indiana, except that they look just like Common Core. And it's happening all around the place. I came from New York, where they changed it from Common Core state standards to Common Core learning standards. Wow. But anyway, the people who made this, and I know that a lot of people want to say teachers did this. Guys, teachers didn't write the standards. What is so funny to me is that David Coleman, who is the main architect of the English language arts standards, basically has this romantic story that he was sitting in a cafe poring over how bad our education system is, so he just started writing standards on a napkin. You believe that? Come on. What he actually did was get some specialists involved, and he started going through all the state standards that we already had from NCLB and before. And he's basically picked and chose the ones he liked. And he put them in front of a committee of people and said, what do you think about this? Can you fix this, make it real, make it usable? That committee had lots of corporate people and lots of higher ed people and lots of experts, and I think 2 former teachers. No teachers in early elementary, no teachers in K-5, okay? So, the validation committee said, go, except one person. Have you heard of Sandra Stotsky? You can look her up later. And she's going around the country saying, I didn't sign off on this, so good for her. But basically, they put it in front of a bunch of different teacher groups and said, give us your feedback on this. And of course, okay, good, let's do this. So all those teacher groups sent the feedback back to Achieve, who is the nonprofit responsible for doing this. And guess what Achieve did with that? Threw it in the trash. Didn't care. The Common Core state standards didn't change one bit based on teacher feedback. And there was a lot of feedback. I've seen the documents from states where teachers sent back hundreds of pages of feedback. Nothing changed. So teachers didn't have any job when it came to writing or revising the standards. What's funny is that our states went ahead and adopted these standards before they were done being written, because we needed the money. We needed the race to the top money. Guess how much race to the top round 1 and 2 money New Mexico won for adopting this system? 0. We didn't win any money in rounds 1 and 2. We won a little bit of money in the early childhood grant, but it has nothing to do with this. The only reason we're stuck with this now is because we took that waiver. And I say we because it's us as a state. It's us as a legislature. It's us as we didn't know what was going on. There were powerful people that drug us into this. And it was bipartisan. I can't point fingers at anybody because it was everybody. And I won't point fingers at people tonight because that's not why I'm here. What's funny to me is that the Common Core State Standards Initiative, run by Achieve, you can Google them if you're curious about Achieve, is that they have a mission statement. Everybody says they're just standards. Well, if they're just standards, then why do we have a mission statement? Who has mission statements? Businesses, right? Corporations, nonprofits. Achieve is a nonprofit, so of course they have to have a mission statement because they think their product is the best. And it's copyrighted, so don't try to change it. And if you try to pawn it off as yours, they'll sue you. So that's just how it goes. But what bugs me about this mission statement, most of all, is a couple of the things they say about what they expect. Number one, and I'm not going to read the whole thing. I hate reading PowerPoints. Don't you hate when people read PowerPoints? But right here in red, it says these are going to give our students a clear understanding of what they're expected to learn. And I have this bad habit. I have to ask questions. So my first question is, who is expecting my kids to learn this stuff? Who? Because it wasn't teachers, I already know that. Parents certainly had no role in this. So who is it that's expecting my kids to know this stuff? I hate these two words. They're designed to be robust and relevant. Robust. It sounds like a cheeseburger. And relevant to our world. I'll get into the relevant thing as we look more at the standards themselves. And that these are going to get our kids best positioned to compete in the global economy. Here we go again with that number one thing. Does anybody really believe that we're suffering in the world with math and science? If you do believe that, it's because you're watching mainstream media. And I want you to think a little more statistically about it and read a little bit more. Yes, technically, I guess our scores do rank 23rd and 25th. Does that mean we're a failing country? Not by any means. And they know that, but they want to scare you. Because if you weren't scared, then you wouldn't buy this. This is also from their website. If you don't believe the stuff I say, I get everything from primary sources. This is from corestandards.org. This is the home page of the Common Core. And this is how they answered the question, why did we make them? Well, the first thing I don't like about this is that no matter what we've been doing for the past 200 and almost 50 years, finally, somebody sat in a restaurant and created the first step in providing our young people with high-quality education. Thank goodness. First step, really? I may not have had a perfect education, but I'm doing all right. And it's an education that is enviable in the rest of the world. So I'm pretty proud of that. So here's their motto. Not officially, but everybody who loves the Common Core goes around saying these three words. That we're going to be able to have fewer standards that get kids to think higher, and we're going to be able to dig deeper. How many teachers totally support this statement? You would be surprised, though. They are out there. I've had very long debates with them. So let's look at these. First of all, let me just impress upon you how ridiculous I think it is that we have math and English language arts standards in kindergarten. That doesn't make any sense. And even worse, look at them. They're coded by numbers and by neat little codes. And they spell out exactly what kids should be able to do. Now there's an argument going around that the Common Core doesn't tell teachers how to teach. Okay. First of all, fine. The Common Core standards, these lists, don't actually say, hey teacher, do it this way. But you know what they do? I almost said doo-doo. You know what they do? They tell kids exactly how to do this. And that's not okay, especially not in kindergarten. Especially not with 5-year-olds who are clumsy and goofy and silly, who don't all do this at the same time. In yellow, I put in some things that do bother me. In white, it's things that, yeah, okay, a 5-year-old should be able to do. It's not outrageous. But when you start looking at early childhood development, you start realizing that things like subtraction, expressions in equations don't fit at all. Kindergartners are visual. If you give them 5 somethings and you take 2 away, a kindergartner is going to tell you, well, there's 3. But as soon as you put that into an equation, gone. And it's not because they're dumb. It's because they're not developed enough to put symbols to reality yet. It's just the way it is. And then when you start getting into telling them how to tear numbers apart and put them into pairs, there's a thing that we have called conserving. We can take a piece of information and save it while we chew on something else and put it together. Kindergartners haven't developed that yet. Some kids don't develop that until they're 9, and that's okay. They shouldn't be punished because they can't do it. Geometry isn't really a big deal. I mean, most kindergartners know their shapes, but it's when we start getting into three-dimensional stuff that it starts tripping them. But math is nothing. I didn't know how to read when I went into kindergarten. And I'm not ashamed of it, because I read like a crazy fiend now. And I've learned everything I know from reading. My daughter went into kindergarten reading books. I mean, finishing a book. The kid flunked out of high school. I mean, you cannot predict how a child does in the future based on whether or not they can read in kindergarten. But that's not okay according to David Coleman. Now, notice that a lot of these things say prompting and support, okay? So a kindergarten teacher or an aide or something is being expected to prompt and support kids to do these things. And a lot of these things are reasonable. My 3-year-old can tell you what the characters are in a book. That's fine. But when you start getting into informational text, and that's a lot of standards for informational text, I'm talking about stuff like how to do things. And can you read this book and then go do that? Again, these are 5-year-olds. You can't expect all of them to do that. And if you've seen a kindergarten class lately, there's no way prompting and support is possible with 28 kindergartners every day, especially when they're cutting aid positions at the same time. And then this conserving thing comes back in. It's the reason a lot of kindergartners can't do symbolic subtraction. They can't deal with syllables. Can they count syllables? Probably, because they memorize it. What does it mean to them? Nothing. It's just a little rhythm they do. And most of the time, if you actually sit down and practice syllables with a kindergartner who's gotten the clapping down together, they're wrong about half of the time. Because they're dumb? No, it just doesn't mean anything to them. Sight words. This is my favorite one. Because look at the sight words. E, of, to, you, she, my, is. Easy little sight words. Come on, kindergartner, you can do this. Have you seen a sight word list come home with a 5-year-old lately? It's not those words. No, not even close. It's 3rd grade sight words. 3rd grade. Why 3rd grade? Because we need to make sure that 3rd graders are set with the 3rd grade sight words before they get to 3rd grade. Why? Because all across the nation, there's a new law being talked about where if a 3rd grader has not passed some arbitrary test, they're not going to 4th. It's the most unbelievable, sick conversation I've heard in a while. And the bottom one is just dumb. Read emergent reader text with purpose, and come on. A kindergartner's purpose in reading is to just say the words right. Can they get meaning out of the book? Yeah, if they're a strong reader. Do all kindergartners have to be that strong reader before they go to 1st? No. Why? And then writing. Again, a lot of these things are not unreasonable, except for the fact that they're standardized. That's unreasonable. But that's not what I'm seeing coming home with kindergartners. That's not the kind of writing. And the funny one, this one makes me laugh, that's why I put it in yellow, is to explore a variety of digital tools to produce and publish your writing. Kindergartners are supposed to be bloggers now? What? These kids are trying to figure out how to write B. But we have to have those digital tools in place because they're going to start taking standardized tests on the computer next year. And some of you have already piloted it. Yep. It's unbelievable. The piloting that happened here and in California and everywhere else that I read was a disaster. Not because the technology broke down, but because some of these kids have never touched a mouse. And now we're expecting them to be proficient on taking computer tests. So teachers, you better start getting them used to that. Listening and speaking, that's fine. It doesn't need to be standardized. How do kids learn how to listen and speak? By watching us and listening to us and talking to us. We don't need to have standards. You know what standards almost automatically make me think of? Worksheets. And I've seen worksheets about listening and speaking. Oh, come on. I have to laugh about it, because then if I don't, I crawl into the fetal position and cry for days. Complete sentences is not a kindergarten skill. Inflections and affixes are not a kindergarten skill. That's a phonics skill. That's 3rd grade. So, how is something so ridiculous here? And why are we asking more questions about it? Well, it wasn't too long ago that Arnie Duncan and all of his friends were standing up and saying, it's got to be right, because how can 46 states be wrong? That's a logical fallacy. That's called bandwagon. That's like, hey, all those states just jumped off a cliff. Why don't you follow them? Okay? So I kind of ignore that talking point, but you hear it all the time. It's almost at the beginning of every article you read about Common Core. My favorite one, and I heard it in Las Cruces, I don't know if you heard it here from PED, but they still say that we have to have national standards, same all the way across the country, for those kids who move. Right. Those poor kids, they leave one state, they go to another state, and they're either way ahead or they're way behind. Poor kids. I went to 13 different schools in 7 years. And I still graduated high school. The point is, I'm one of 1.7% of kids who move across state lines from the time they're in kindergarten till the time they graduate. 1.7%. Now, it's really noble that we want to take care of those kids, but that's something we've been doing anyway. I know that they sometimes show up and it's something different or something, something they get lost or whatever, but there are supports usually in place for that, and there's absolutely no evidence that the Common Core is going to fix that problem anyway. You know where most kids move? Within the state, from district to district, because they're poor, because they can't pay the rent, they get evicted, they have to go move in with grandma. She doesn't live in the same school district, she lives in another town. Common Core is not going to fix that, because it's within the state. You talk about military brats? We have to watch out for them. Well, there are a high percentage that don't use DoD schools, even though the DoD has signed on to Common Core, so whatever. But it's the same thing. They have the support there. And the other thing is, I looked at Holloman, a middle school on Holloman Air Force Base. They have the highest scores in the state. So what do they need Common Core for? That guy. I've heard from teachers that Common Core makes them so much better at their jobs. And I hear it all. I hear my kids are thinking critically now. I'm able to get them to collaborate better. What are some other good ones? I don't have to do as much test prep. And then I see what they're doing and it's test prep, so I don't think they really get it. It's not that teachers don't get it. It's that there are some who are very loud, and they're probably either encouraged to be loud, or I don't have any evidence for this, paid to be loud. Like the guy who was in Las Cruces, the only teacher on the panel when they came to visit me. Only teacher. And he sat there and said that thanks to Common Core, my kids can actually think critically now. And I'm thinking, first of all, you've been teaching for 2 years. Second of all, isn't this something that we do anyway? I've told this to veteran teachers who start talking about good things about Common Core, and all the things they say, I come back with, this happens because you're a professional, because you know your kids, because you know how to respond to your kids. It has nothing to do with the standards. My favorite story was in 2012 when I was in Syracuse, New York, and about 2 hours west is Buffalo, and they named their teacher of the year. He wrote an editorial to the paper that's basically went on and on about the only reason he's teacher of the year is because New York has the Common Core. And he left his email at the bottom. And I asked questions. And I said, look, give yourself some credit, man. You are a teacher of the year because you're a good teacher, not because the government passed some standards. And he wrote back 2 weeks later, I think, and said, I was asked to write a letter to the editor. I'm still trying to find out who wrote that letter. He didn't write that letter. So somehow they got switched or traded or something. And to answer the critical thinking thing, I have yet, and I've spent way more time than anybody should ever spend reading through these standards. I have yet to find anything that says critical thinking or that means critical thinking. I haven't seen anything yet. But here are the 3 things that keep trying to tell you mean critical thinking. 1, writing about your math, being able to explain how you got the answer you did. That's not critical thinking. 2, triangulation in your writing. In other words, you have to find 1, 2, 3 different sources that back up what you just wrote and cite them. It's not critical thinking. And the 3rd one is, I've heard it both ways, close reading or deep reading, where you take a little tiny piece of a book and you read it so closely that you can just feel what the author is saying. That's not critical thinking, that's guessing. Because you cannot get context out of a book until you read the book, okay? That's not critical thinking. But they keep pushing that on us as though that's what we're teaching our kids, is to think critically. We all know what critical thinking is. It's when we see something or we hear something and it makes that part of our brain go, wait a minute, I don't think I buy that. And then you go looking for some evidence, right? That's critical thinking. That's not in the Common Core. Because the people who created the Common Core don't need critical thinkers. Trust me. And the last one that they keep spreading around to us anyway is that these are internationally benchmarked against the best standards in the world. I'm just going to throw this one under the bus real quick. No, they're not. They were picked and chosen, like I told you, from the state standards that are around here. The benchmarking thing, if you go to corestandards.org and read about their benchmarking, you'll be linked to a 300-page document about how they did this. Luckily, only the first 15 actually talk about it, because the rest of them are just standards, to try to show you they did some research. What it was that the ACT Corporation, who makes the ACT test, kind of arbitrarily looked at some scores and some standards for the countries who have standards, and then kind of stuck us somewhere in between Japan and Germany as far as what our standards look like now. And they called it good, benchmarked. We're done. But it's totally arbitrary. Because first of all, the countries that they listed that we got our standards benchmarked against, half of them don't have national standards. The other half have standards that look nothing like the Common Core. So, and I'll kind of point that out in a minute. So here are my talking points. I don't like content standards that are static, period, at all. Especially a Common Core set of standards that's trademarked and can't be changed, K through 12. So you're telling me that when a kindergartner walks into kindergarten next year, the world isn't going to change for 13 years? Because the standards aren't, if they get their way. Somebody had a vision of what the perfect high school graduate looks like. What do we want all of our kids to look like when they graduate? And then they backwards map that through the grades. And that's not me just making that up. That's David Coleman's own words. We backwards map this. From what? Well, that's one of those things that we're going to have to talk about because nobody knows. Nobody will admit what that looks like. They've tried to make it sugar-coated, but it doesn't make any sense. Teachers who love to teach their kids to be innovative and creativity know that this is putting a stifling mess. I mean, it's coming down, and it's putting a ceiling on that. High school kids who are gifted, or even high school kids who have special needs, know that these are stifling them. They're putting them in a narrow little corridor and saying, stay here. It's very frustrating. They're designed to be tested. Why are they coded by number and letter and all that? So that we can keep track of how kids are performing on those standards. They're designed to be tested. Those test scores do two things. They track who needs help, so that we can sell things to those kids, interventions, and they track them. They're tracking your kids, and they're tracking their teachers and their schools. Why? That's the whole point of my presentation, and I'll get to that, don't worry. And of course, I already showed you, at least in kindergarten, and as you go up, you'll notice that these are highly developmentally appropriate. What's amazing to me is that at the lower grades, they're just way too much. And then when you go up, they're just way too little, and they're too narrow. Anybody in here have a free-thinking high schooler? Has anybody ever seen a high schooler who's not free-thinking? Who doesn't think they've got it figured out? I haven't seen too many of those. And when you try to tell them that these are the exact instructions you have to follow, they tend to rage against that. And of course, we're putting way too much power in the hands of people who shouldn't have that power. So, those are my things. But in the news, we heard about, first of all, how dumb our kids are compared to the rest of the world. We don't have enough STEM college grads. Have you heard this one? It's getting big. President Obama talks about it all the time. Jeb Bush talks about it all the time. And, of course, Bill Gates. STEM is another acronym: science, technology, engineering, and math. We don't have enough of these people running around the world. Or, I'm sorry, around the United States. We have too many in the world. Here in New Mexico, both Susana Martinez and her, I always call them Hannah Susana, because they're kind of the same person now. But they go around and saying that this is going to cure our dropout rate, that we have way too many dropouts in New Mexico. I'll get to that in a second. And our kids, of course, they go into college and they need remediation. Ugh. We're failing them. But don't worry, because we have the answer now. And this is a direct quote from John King in New York. Common Core State Standards is the answer to our needs for success. When everybody says that, that becomes a silver bullet. And then you say, wait a minute, critical thinking. Okay. First of all, those international rankings where we're way down and we're dumb, Common Core supporters love to say that the successful countries, the one with the high scores, have national standards, so why shouldn't we? Okay? True, some of them do. And the one they want to guess the country they all point to? Japan has actually dropped. Now, a lot of people don't talk about Japan anymore. A lot of people talk about China. Finland. Finland is the #1 and highest scoring country in science and math for the past 2 years in a row. So of course the United States is like, Finland, Finland, Finland. First of all, Finland has the same population as Wisconsin, and roughly the same landmass. So it's not the same country. And another thing is, the curriculum, and this is straight from the government of Finland, the curriculum outlines how teachers should focus on developing their students' creativity, management, and innovation skills. Teachers grasp those goals, their students' goals, and select their own teaching methods and lesson plans. Ooh. Those are their national standards. For 3rd grade. I would show you kindergarten so you can compare.
They don't have.
Finland doesn't have kindergarten standards. But look how vague these are. Remember our coded and very specific standards? This is a framework. This isn't standards. This is a framework. This is, hey guys, we'd really like 3rd graders to be able to do these things, so you figure out how to get them to do that. How many teachers would love to see that in our schools? How many parents would love that kind of local influence? There are a couple of them. And then finally, at the end, we're not going to give them a standardized test because Finland doesn't do that. Finland gives one test in 8th grade at the end of the year. And they use that test to see how Finland is doing. That's it. There's no hiring and firing. There's no pay structure based on it. There's no school closings based on it. It's just, how are we doing? Could we do that as a nation? Two answers for that, and they're both kind of questions. Should we be doing that as a nation? And why aren't we doing that more at the state level? We do have a test that we use called the NAEP, the NAEP, which kind of does that, but we don't really pay attention to that anymore.
Unless the scores go down.
Yeah, unless the scores are great. And then we all point at Massachusetts and say, hey, what's Massachusetts doing? Well, Massachusetts is a Common Core state, so I guess it doesn't matter. But here's the difference between those two. We have standards in the CCSS that are prescribing how kids do things. Hey kid, here's your prescription. If you don't take your prescription, you can't go to college. That's our system right now. They're designed to be tested. They put all the pressure on the teacher. They provide everybody a standard path of learning. That's the whole point. And they focus on skills and content, where if you look at the kind of things that Finland uses, and again, we can't be Finland, but I do like their standards structure because they're descriptive. This is what we would kind of like to see right around this time. You figure out how to do it, teachers and schools. It's designed as a framework. It puts the expectation on the student to perform. Remember when we used to do that? Remember when I used to walk into high school and get reamed because I wasn't doing my job? My teacher didn't get reamed because I wasn't doing my job. So far, it's providing a personal path of learning. Kids don't necessarily all have their own individual like IEPs in Finland, but the teacher's goal is to meet each kid's own track, their own track that they came up with, that their parents and they came up with, that this is what I would like to be able to do by the time I'm out of high school. And they do that right around 8th or 9th grade. You know what our 8th graders are starting to do? Take a test that tells them what to be when they grow up. If that sounds creepy and scary and totally nuts and what are you talking about, get that guy out of here, sorry, it's happening. It's one of the reasons I resigned from my job, because my 8th graders were handed a test that gave them a profile. These are the colleges you should probably go to. This is what you should probably major in. This is the job you should go into because you will suck at everything else. That's disgusting. So why is all of a sudden the government and corporations saying we don't have enough of these kids who can do sciencey and mathy stuff? Did you know that half of our graduates with bachelor's degrees in a science or mathematics or engineering field don't have jobs in their field? Half. There's only a 4% unemployment rate, so I guess that's something. But I worked with two, when I was the marketing manager for Target, don't hate me, it was a long time ago, I needed the money. I worked with two people in the electronics department at Target, making $8.85 an hour, and they both had mechanical engineering degrees, but they couldn't find a job. 50% nationwide can't find a job in their field. That includes computer scientists and engineers. Those are the two you're going to hear our president and all those other people screaming about. We need more engineers, we need more coders. We need people who can build software. We're told it's because American graduates aren't qualified for these jobs. We're not smart enough. Take a minute. If you were to take a survey nationwide, and it's been done, where we asked a whole bunch of people, what do you think America's #1 greatest industry is? What would they say? Technology. Technology is a good guess, and it's up there. It's not #1 though. It's hard to guess. Higher education. We have the best colleges in the world, according to the rest of the world. Why do you think they all send them here? Right? And they're expensive, so they gotta be worth it. So how you're telling me now that kids, American kids, graduating from American colleges aren't smart enough to do this stuff? There's something weird about that. So this guy goes around to high schools now. Well, he doesn't. He goes to charter schools. He sends people to high schools to say, everybody should learn how to code. He makes amazing little YouTube videos with all the kids' favorite people like Will.i.am from the Black Eyed Peas and Ashton Kutcher and all those, pretty face little people, saying, learn how to code. It made me a better musician. It made me a better actor. It made me a blah, blah, blah. So he wants a bunch of high school kids to graduate knowing how to write software. But he can't, we already have a 50% out of field employment rate. How does this make any sense? Well, first of all, if you graduate from college with a bachelor's degree ready to write software, you're looking at about 60 grand a year. It's a relatively high paying job. And they're in high demand. But we don't hire these kids because we can hire somebody from outside the country for 1/6 of that cost. Bill Gates, his company, Microsoft, hires more people from outside of our borders than any other tech company in the world, by far. At least 3,000 H-1B visas a year. That's a lot of kids. That's a lot of our kids who are now working at Target, okay? Because somebody that comes from overseas isn't gonna want 60 grand. They'll take 10, because they're gonna end up living on a campus anyway, probably while they're going to school. But if we can get American kids to all know how to code, then he can have it both ways. He can have his cake and eat it too. He can not only get his workforce, but he can also be saving American jobs. So let's get every kid to code. In other words, if we can build a huge pool of engineers and tech workers, this is Economics 101, what can we do to their wages? Push them down to the floor. And we can start a revolving door. As soon as one of our software techs gets a little too mouthy about his benefits, get out, kid. We have plenty more in line. And we don't have to pay him as much as we paid you either. There's some places you're already starting to see this practice. The revolving door, Walmart, as an example. I know everybody beats on Walmart. I don't really care about Walmart. But one of the things they do is a revolving door. As soon as one of their cashiers steps up to customer service manager, first of all, she's not part-time. I mean, she's not full-time. You almost can't be full-time at Walmart. And then she starts saying, well, now I'm really excited. I want to be the assistant manager. I want to be the logistics manager. First of all, they say, settle down, kid. Be happy with what you got. And as soon as somebody else starts coming up the ranks behind her, they boot her. It's a revolving door. This is not just me saying, hey, my friend got fired from Walmart. This is actual business practices now in retail corporations, which is why I always say support your local businesses. But this isn't STEM education. What they're trying to sell it to you as is a science literacy and a job preparation. But it's really not. It's preparation to be miserable, in my opinion, for a job that you were really excited about. And one of the targets they're really pushing on now is getting girls into STEM. Because if there's one thing they can do that's better than getting a bunch of STEM graduates, it's doubling that number and getting women into the workforce as well. They try to make it sound like it's empowering to women. I don't think so. Just like a lot of other things, I think it's a setup. But we have lots of people, lots of money behind it. GE needs techs. Intel needs techs, cheap ones. IBM actually has their own line of schools now. If you graduate from one of their schools, you're guaranteed a job with IBM in New York City. Starting salary, $23,000 a year. Let's see, I could probably afford a rent of $500 a month on that salary, which in New York is what, sharing a studio with 7 other people? I already talked about Walmart. ExxonMobil has a major campaign going on in the eastern states, the oil states, and I haven't heard too much about them over here yet, but that's because they're busy with Pennsylvania. And of course, Microsoft. Why is ExxonMobil in on this? They're an oil company, they're an energy company. 2 reasons. Number one, to find oil, you need geologists. Geologists make a lot of money, unless you have a whole bunch of them, and then you can start lowering their wages. They're also an energy company who's trying to burst into other things, wind, solar. They're trying to figure out how to push out their competition, and they're going to need engineers for that. Lots of them. And Oh, sorry, 3. They're global. They want people worldwide. Okay. I'm not even going to spend any time with this one because Hannah Susanna is totally wrong. Actually, for the past 30 years, our dropout rate's been falling like a rock. They're still too high, yes. Is there any evidence that Common Core can stop this? Guys, it's anecdotal, and I don't have any paperwork to show you, but if there's anything I've heard so far, Common Core this year is making our dropout problem exponentially worse. I have kids coming to me telling me I just dropped out of high school so I can go to college. Because there's no way I'm getting past Hannah Susanna's testing. Somebody on this side of the world, it might have been one of your friends, said that we have kids now leaving so they can go into the Job Corps. Because high school's not giving them the education they need. This is making things worse, not better. 2 problems with this college and career ready thing yet. Nobody has given us a definition of what that means. They've tried. There's been a couple of things. One is to get kids ready for the first year in a community college. Do all kids want to go to community college? No. A lot do, but not all of them. Is it getting kids ready for university? Go ask a university professor how they feel about that. Not even close. Is it getting kids ready for any career in the world? That's ridiculous. So if you don't have a definition, it's a meaningless statement. So I ignore it. The testing, and this is what I do. The high stakes testing is married to the Common Core. I tell people to think of Common Core as like the rails, a train rail, the railroad. Everything else kind of rolls on that rail. And one of the things that is inextricably tied to this Common Core state standards is the test. Because what's the point of having these standards if we don't test them? So we have testing that's going to start full-fledged here next year. We've already done the pilots, which were so successful, according to the stories from around the state. We did practice tests for PARC, the Partnership, I hate this one, the Partnership for Assessment of College and Career Readiness. Nope, that was backwards. See? The Partnership for Assessment for Readiness of College and Career. It's so convoluted, it makes me nauseous. What's funny to me, and it's not going to be funny, it's not going to be funny this summer, because Kentucky, 2 years ago, took their first Common Core tests. 75% of their students failed them. New York, last year, same thing. And we even had our ed commissioner tell us, expect the scores to be a little bit lower. 70% failure rate. What did Arnie Duncan say? Oh, I guess we've been telling our kids things that aren't true this whole time. They must not be as smart as we've been telling them they are. Really? Because we just kind of made up these new tests against these standards that have never been field tested? In New Mexico, expect it again, guys. We've only field tested so far, but expect it again. The SBAs this year were apparently half aligned to the Common Core. I don't even know what that means, but it's not going to be pretty. And for the first time this year, teachers' jobs were supposed to be tied to those scores. And they haven't even finished them yet. They don't even know what a cut score is yet. They haven't told us a cut score. Because they're making this up as they go along. Because this is a setup. And I still have people here in the state who say that we're going to be able to save this. We're going to make this okay. Because we really want the standards, but we don't want the tests. So we're going to delete the two. Okay, well when you delete two things, you now have two things. You have standards, but you have tests. And the tests aren't aligned with standards anymore. So what are you going to do? First of all, what tests, and then what are you going to do? Nobody has an answer for this either. It's a talking point. So if somebody goes around saying, don't worry, we're going to delink the tests, ask them what that means. And they probably won't tell you, because these are the tests that will be aligned to Common Core next year. You're going to delink all of those tests? Does that mean get rid of them? Probably not. DIBELs and CRAs have been in New Mexico communities forever. STAR and math and reading, those aren't going anywhere anytime soon, but they are aligned to the Common Core. So what happens when you delink? That doesn't make any sense. Park is next year. EOCs are a complete nightmare this year.
Have you seen how many questions? There are actually 24 questions.
Yeah.
24, and that's supposed to cover the year.
Cover the whole year.
Yeah.
Music teachers didn't get their EOCs until 2 days before they were supposed to give
I mean,
them.
those are just ridiculous.
Performance EOCs for music were based on some recordings 2 months ago. Some kids weren't even at that concert, but their teachers are still being evaluated on kids who either weren't there or who were there and aren't their kids. It's just such a mess. And for Arnie Duncan or for anybody else who supports the Common Core to come up and say that the Common Core were just standards, they have nothing to do with the tests. OnCoreStandards.org, their own website, they very, very strongly state that yes, you will take tests on these standards. They know it. They require it. Bill Gates, and I'm not going to read this whole thing, but right here in the middle, he gave a speech to some legislators in 2009 before those standards were written. I mean, they were being written, but they weren't done. He says, when the tests are aligned to the Common Core standards, the curriculum will line up as well. So anybody who says that teachers have the freedom to teach, if you still do, hold on to it and cherish it because it's going to be gone. Because the curriculum is going to follow. And it's going to unleash a powerful market of people providing services for better teaching. For the first time, there will be a large uniform base of customers, not kids, not teachers, customers who will buy our products. The Common Core has nothing to do with education in this country. It has everything to do with making money. And that's just how it is. There is a huge pot of money in public education that these people have been waiting to get their grubby hands on as close to legally as possible. And they think they finally figured it out. So, this is a grand experiment. Short term, let's make profit off the kids who are failing because they need interventions. Long term, let's start feeding these kids based on their test scores into where we need them to be successful corporations who pay politicians to pass laws to keep us rich, basically. Okay. What is this doing to our schools? When I started teaching, I belonged to a community. The school I went to had smiles on the teachers' faces. I said hi to my principal every morning. I had parents who would drop off their kids and say, "Have a nice day," and I would wave and say, "Have a nice day." My last year of teaching, you would walk down the hall and here comes one of your coworkers and it's kind of a, you know, you're both thinking the same thing. You just don't want to talk about it. Principals are stuck in their office because they have so much paperwork and silly mandates to deal with. They don't have time to interact anymore. Unless you're lucky enough to have an administrator who doesn't care about that garbage and just wants to be a principal. Parents are having a cow because of the things that are coming home. Teachers are freaking out because if they don't send those things home, then their kids won't pass the tests or show growth, and they lose their job. This is not a community anymore. I have one word to describe what our schools are becoming, and some of them already are, and that's toxic. It's a toxic environment. You have a whole bunch of good people who work or spend their day in a toxic environment. And all of a sudden, these people start doing things that you wouldn't expect them to do, like cheating. How many teachers have you heard about in the news cheating? Bad teachers. Well, when you're in a toxic environment like that, and you know you're about to lose your job because of something that isn't fair, how bad do you want your job? Enough to cheat a little bit? Even if it makes the news? Even if you go to jail? I can't believe they're throwing teachers in jail for this. And if your school doesn't show progress for 3 years in a row under the NCLB waiver, and this is actually in our code now in New Mexico, it can be either co-located or shut down and sold. Sold to who? A corporate charter management organization. Not the good kind of charter school. the kind that makes money. That's all they care about. And how do they track how much money they make or if they get to keep their money? With test scores. That turns these into corporate test prep factories. Not only are they trying to get your kids to show growth so that they can keep their money, but they're also being used to track your kids as they go through the program so that they can spit them out and stick them wherever they're supposed to go, according to their test scores. That may be college, it may be the oil fields, it may be Microsoft, it may be prison. They don't care because they're making money. And guess who is 100% behind this? Our friend Bill. He puts more money into charter schools than anybody else. How much money has he given to public schools lately in the past decade? Other than a few Microsoft technology grants, nothing else. He actually donates money to these people. These people who try to make it sound like they care about kids, but they don't. They care about growing them into useful workers. And the proof is in the image. One of the most successful corporate charter management organizations is called Rocket Ship. Have you heard of them? They're out of California. They're slowly moving east. Ooh. They're the colorful one. At least they have colors. But their schools literally have kids sit at a workstation with their own individualized education plan in a cubicle, and their school days are 8.5 hours long. They only sit at the cubicle for 6. Because they do have a half-hour lunch. They do have 20 minutes to do whatever they want to do outside. And they have 15 minutes per day on an alternating elective schedule. 15 minutes. So you get to go to choir one day for 15 minutes. You get to go paint something for 15 minutes. And then you get back there, kid, and start test prepping. Because we have scores to gain. Next door, in Tucson, they don't even let them have color. Carpe Diem Charter Schools is kind of flying under the radar. Rocket Ship is getting in trouble lately, but they're not. And they're right next door. I haven't seen any of these in New Mexico yet. But Hannah Scandera is a big fan of these kind of charters. Why? Because they pay her to be a fan. Because they send her on lavish trips. If the newspaper is making you mad at Hannah for spending taxpayer money, she's not really. She's taking gifts to make changes to our schools. Okay? Look at all these kids. Look at this adult. Rocket Ship has a teacher to student ratio of 95 to 1. Carpe Diem right now has 150 to 1. And they're trying to push that to 200. Bill Gates thinks that you can have a classroom with 300 to 1 and still get kids to learn because the technology does all the work. This woman is not a certified teacher. She went through a 5-week training program with Teach for America and got an alternate certificate, which used to be not legal in this state, but thanks to some changes, it is now. What is this doing to our kids? This is the bottom line for me. I don't do this because I'm mad at adults and I want to shame them and I want to make them look bad. I do this because they're hurting kids. That's the only reason. Because these are kids. And we bicker and we argue and we call names and we forget about these people or even the young ones that are taller than me. Because they don't handle this. When you're a middle school girl, you don't handle sitting in a cubicle for 6 hours or even in a Common Core standardized classroom for a period where you're supposed to be working on something, collaboratively or not, to get ready for a test. And then finding out that you're not good enough. I cannot tell you how many of my students, gifted students, who knew that they were good students, got A's all year long, and then suddenly were deflated because they didn't show growth. Think about this. You have a gifted kid walk into school. They take the test, which is usually always on the first day of school now, the pre-test. How do you think a gifted kid does on that test? Really well. How do you think they do on the test at the end of the year? Really well. Did they grow?
No.
No, it didn't show growth. Same with the special needs kids. The ones who have a hard time reading those tests. They're not showing growth because the skills that we're trying to get them measured on aren't happening. How about the midstream kids, the ones who come in low and try really hard and they show growth, but are they proficient? Not always. It's a setup and it's a mess, and it hurts these guys because all they hear is that they're either dumb or they're not good enough. No matter how hard you try, you're still not good enough. That's a big deal, especially for adolescents. And then, look at the kindergartners. I cannot believe that I hear stories about kindergartners going to school with their new backpacks, and I get to go to the big kids' school now, and I have new shoes, and I can't wait to see my teacher. And they come home 2 days later, I'm not going back to school. You just created a dropout at the age of 4 or 5. And they cry when they get home because they can't do their homework. And their parents get frustrated because they don't understand the homework either. These are not real pictures. Well, they're real, but they're not kids that I know. They're kids that match people that I know, stories that I've heard. This one is real. This is a girl in New York. I met her mom when I lived there. She's 7 years old, and her cancer is finally in remission after 4 years of chemotherapy and radiation. So she's not weak, and she's not dumb. But she broke. And her mom was playing with her camera, because she's a photographer, as you can see. And before this picture was taken, she said, you know what, just put it down and don't worry about it. Go sit with Papa and watch a show. And she did. She left, put her jammies on. And while her mom was fiddling with the settings on the camera, she came back to the kitchen, picked up her pencil, and started bawling, saying, I have to finish this. And she just happened to catch that picture. 7 years old. This is the kind of stress that adults might have about their jobs. Not first graders, not second graders. Why are they being hurt like this? Because the people running the game don't think of our kids as people. They think of them as products, as a future workforce. These are commodities to them. They're not lives. Teachers are handed scripts, and if you haven't been yet, you will. Connected mathematics has already made its way into middle schools in New Mexico, right? In Hobbs for sure. And I used to use this as I saw fit. First of all, the teacher's manual, I put in a cabinet and forgot all about. I used the student's manual because that's what we were doing. When I finally did pull out the teacher's manual, it's because I was told to. Take out the teacher's manual and let's start following the program. Okay, whatever. And then I realized that these are scripts. What's in italics is what teachers should say. What follows is what middle schoolers should say, is how they should respond. If you've ever been around middle schoolers, they never say what you expect them to say. And neither do 5-year-olds, and neither do high school kids. So having a script is ridiculous. The only reason to have a script is because you don't either want your teacher to do the things the way they want to do it, or because you're hiring teachers who don't know how to teach. And you just need to give them a script. Remember I mentioned Teach for America? The 5-week training program? Do you really think you can be a teacher after 5 weeks of training? No. So we'll just give you a script. It's easy, read the script. What I always wondered is, what happens when your middle school kids don't say that? What do you fall back on? I don't know. But the good news is you only have to do it for 2 years and you're out. And you get a great mark on your resume. Have fun in law school. Professionals are getting tired of this. They either close their door and teach and get shown the door because they're not following the program. Not so much here yet. Or they leave because I can't take it anymore. And you are seeing a lot of that in New Mexico this year. The resignations and early retirements are epidemic this year. And that's sad, because who's going to replace them? People who have been in training for 5 weeks. Or, according to Hannah Scandera, there's not enough of those yet in New Mexico, so we're going to start bringing offshore teachers. Yeah. So far, we have a contract with a teacher training organization in the Philippines. Why is this important to our corporations? Because we want to be more like Singapore. We want to have strong corporations who make lots of money. But Singapore recognizes something that we're forgetting. And that's, yes, their testing structure, which we're copying right now, brought them up to where they are. They are a technological powerhouse. They have very powerful corporations. But they've hit a ceiling. They found out that that could only take you so far. The education minister of Singapore said that they are called them an exam meritocracy. We're very good at taking tests. We're very good at teaching our kids to do things that you can test. America, on the other hand, is very good at teaching their kids things that you can't test. Innovation, creativity, collaboration, innovation, caring, hard work. He said, we can learn from America. In fact, they want to change their system so that they can do more about what we were doing in the 90s and before. Finland's model right now is America in the 90s. We're flipping. Everybody's copying us at the same time that we're copying them. It doesn't make any sense, except that you can make money this way. Finland doesn't want to make money off their kids. Singapore doesn't really care about making money off their kids. They got plenty of money. They want innovation now. They want to be innovators. I have to talk about this a little bit, because it is true that, first of all, we've always had databases on our kids. It's nothing new. What's changing is that they're being consolidated and sold to private corporations, who, because of the change in our educational privacy laws, are now pretty much allowed to do whatever they want with them. They can sell your kids' information to Pearson so that they can target them with interventions. They can sell your kids' information to colleges, community colleges, ExxonMobil, Microsoft, whatever. In Bloom, did you hear about In Bloom at all in the news? No, because nobody ever reports this stuff. But in New York City, they were trying to basically take all New York City's kids' data and put it into one big place so that they could sell it. New York City parents and teachers shut that down. Hooray. Guess where they are now? Santa Fe, New Mexico. And Denver, Colorado. But Santa Fe, New Mexico. Because Hannah said, don't feel bad. Come over here. We have data for you. So what do? Number one, ask questions. Don't just listen to what people say because they make it sound good. And I understand that's difficult when you have the public education department come to Clovis and give you a spiel and all kinds of feel-good stuff, and they don't let you ask questions. But try anyway. If nothing else, they'll get annoyed and leave. So it's a win-win. Find somebody to talk to that is trying to make a difference. I was just talking to a gentleman who's talking about the fact that they're canvassing now, that they're having a competition with other counties. How many people can we get out? Can we get informed and motivated to take action? Again, this is not a political meeting. I don't even belong to a political party, and I have no loyalties. But I want to stress upon you that if you're committed to saving our kids and their schools, you've got to get Martinez out in November. This is a big deal. You know what? I hate when people say anybody but I'm saying it this time. Because she's not our governor. She's an employee of outside interests. That's what she is. I don't care if she's Republican or Democrat. She's an employee. She's not a governor. Boycott what they're selling. This is what I do. Don't let your kids take the tests that are aligned with the Common Core. Don't let your kids take a test that has nothing to do with